This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And for the second day running, it's hard to know where to start. I'll begin, as I did yesterday, with a brief explanation of why we have to talk about this stuff, why the idea of not giving oxygen to Elon Musk and his increasingly unhinged attacks upon to coin a popular phrase, the sovereign British government, cannot be ignored. It's not just the bottom feeders and the opportunists who sadly couldn't hang around for a quick critique at the end of Nick's show this time round. But if you enjoyed it last time, then rest assured that my door is always open. It's not just them that will seek to make political capital out of this. It influences public opinion as well. So to suggest that these people, that someone as important and as powerful as Musk should be ignored is just, I'm not going to say silly, but it's wrong. So not for the first time, I find myself compelled to mop up some of the mess that has been made by other corners of the UK media, up to and including the Times newspaper, which is a profoundly different organ from the one that led the line on reporting grooming gang scandals at the beginning of the last decade. The Times today, of course, is edited by Tony Gallagher, a Paul Dacre protégé, no less, former editor of both The Sun and The Daily Telegraph, a man, with the possible exception of his own mentors, probably more responsible for the denigration and the lurch to the extreme right wing undertaken by much of the UK media than anybody else alive. Because make no mistake, if a foreign politician launches an attack upon this country, the response would historically be relatively unified. But the radicalisation of the British right-wing press has never been on clearer display than today. And remember, Musk is not, in any conventional use of the term, even a politician. Our country, Britain, is being denigrated, insulted by a foreign far-right conspiracy theorist. A foreign far-right conspiracy theorist. But from the Mail to the Telegraph, the Express to the Times, the editors of those organs, and perhaps more pertinently the owners of those organs, have elected instead to turn their fire on the UK Prime Minister. And the first thing we need to clear up is this lie, this incredible lie that is already 3/4 of the way round the world before the truth has got its trousers on. It's a lie you could only collude in if you didn't listen to what Keir Starmer said yesterday, or you were quite consciously and deliberately ignoring what Keir Starmer said yesterday, or pretending not to understand what Keir Starmer said yesterday. Elon Musk has accused the British Prime Minister of being, and I quote, deeply complicit in the mass rapes in exchange for votes. End quote. He has accused Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, who, widely regarded, and don't take my word for it, speak to people that she's helped over the course of her career, to have done more to safeguard women and children against sexual violence than probably any other politician in Parliament. He has described her as a genocide rape apologist. These are far-right lies. These are far-right lies designed to denigrate our sovereign government, our politicians, and to create the illusion in the minds of people that everybody who is brown or everybody who is Muslim or everybody who has Pakistani heritage, every British person with Pakistani heritage, is somehow a rapist, a child abuser, or complicit in these hideous crimes. Keir Starmer, there is a very strong argument to be made, and don't take my word for it. Speak to former chief prosecutor in the Northwest who led the line on these prosecutions, has probably done more than any other politician in this country to drag this scandal into the light during his period as Director of Public Prosecutions. These are facts. These are matters of historical record. There are also questions to be asked. For example, why are we having this conversation 5 months into a Labour government when it involves crimes and scandals that were being committed 20, 30 years ago? Why have we not had any of these points being raised by any of these chancellors during the last 14 years of Tory government, including, of course, the 3 or 4 years where the Tory party was led by the man who has described all investigations into historic child sexual abuse as a complete waste of money. The phrase he used, of course, was spaffing money up the wall. So Keir Starmer did not say yesterday, and this is really important because I can't believe that I'm seeing this on the front page of once respectable newspapers. Keir Starmer did not say yesterday that calls for an inquiry, calls for another inquiry, are in any way far right. Okay? I am deeply shocked by some of the people pretending that he did, because it is dangerous. We're now in a moment of jeopardy. Someone as influential, someone as powerful, someone as rich as Elon Musk exercises enormous influence. I heard Nigel Farage earlier talking about how he never abandons his principles. One of his principles historically has always been that foreign billionaires shouldn't be able to exercise any influence whatsoever over British politics. When he was talking, I think, about George Soros, or even that foreign politicians shouldn't be able to even offer up public opinions on British politics. When he was talking about Barack Obama, it must be other principles that he's talking about when he claims he never abandons them. For example, the promise to quit Britain in the event of Brexit being a failure. You can conduct, apparently, a 40-minute interview with Nigel Farage in 2025 without once bringing up the subject of the Brexit that he championed and cheerled for. I mean, that is an astonishing achievement by any measure. But even more astonishing is the pretense that Keir Starmer claimed yesterday that calls for an inquiry were far right. What is far right is the lies that underpin Elon Musk's public position. The lies about Jess Phillips, the lies about British history, the lies about British politics, and the lies about the British Prime Minister. Now, that is a matter of record. That is a matter of fact. What I can't quite get my head around, what I struggled with yesterday, and of course you're absolutely right to remind me that Nazir Afzal, the former chief prosecutor in the Northwest who led the line, is himself of British Pakistani heritage, as is Adil Ray, who made one of the first documentaries about this subject at around the time Andrew Norfolk was doing the work, as was the Channel 4 journalist who did the same. But of course that doesn't matter. None of that matters. What matters is that British politics has now been split apart in a way I can't remember seeing by this far-right foreign conspiracy theorist who happens to be the richest man in the world. It has been split apart in a way I can't quite conceive of. And that, I think, is what I want to talk about today in the first instance. It's about what... no one can be surprised that Farage refuses to condemn this vicious attack on Jess Phillips. Well, maybe you are surprised. Do you know what? Maybe he could have done. Maybe he could have put a little bit more distance between himself and the likes of Robert Jenrick by behaving honourably and decently instead of continuing the lie that freedom of speech is somehow freedom to lie, whether you are defending lies about terrible crimes committed in this country that are posted online, whether you're defending incitement to hideous violence and claiming that that is somehow free speech. Whatever nuance you want to bring to the table, you could, of course, make a case for free speech not being freedom to lie. But what draws my attention today is the response of politicians from whom I expected more. These attacks on Phillips in particular and Keir Starmer, who I suppose as Prime Minister becomes the figurehead, becomes in a way the inevitable target of bile. They're like something I don't think I've ever seen before in British politics. Listen, the notion that another inquiry is being resisted because people are worried about what would come out is nonsense. The intelligent opposition to another inquiry, and listen, I'm not a politician. If I was Keir Starmer, I'd just call one now to make it go away. And yet, of course, it wouldn't help any of the victims. And Alexis Jay, who conducted the last one, has said, if you call another inquiry now, it will actually prolong and postpone the implementation of the recommendations that I made in the last one. The last one delivered in 2022 to a government that contains many of the people who are now claiming that Keir Starmer is somehow remiss. So because I am a little bit lazier than Keir Starmer, if I was Prime Minister, I'd just call an inquiry. It means you can cut off at the knees the ludicrous opportunism of Nigel Farage pretending that he can somehow call his own in a way that would be in any way meaningful or substantive. People even still now failing to understand that this isn't about identifying further culprits. This is about identifying people who may have been remiss or who certainly were less than were delinquent, really, in doing their own duty in the protection of these children and these young women. It's not even about finding more criminals. It's about identifying the public servants who dropped the ball. But again, I don't know. I can't tell the difference between the people who are pretending not to understand that and the people who truly don't understand that. But it's a question of what has changed. Okay? And that is not about any of the people whose names I've said so far. It's about Liz Truss joining in the attacks on Jess Phillips. And Liz Truss must know. Liz Truss, of course, who appeared on a podcast presented by somebody who had said that he wouldn't even rape Jess Phillips. Long live the sisterhood. It's about James Cleverly joining in yesterday with these attacks on the Labour government for the offence of, I still don't know what, declining to call an inquiry, which the leader of the last inquiry has said would make it harder to implement the findings. And most of all, it's Robert Jenrick, who could have been leader of the Conservative Party and who has come about as close as you can come, I think, without explicitly stating that he considers all British people of Pakistani heritage to be undesirable and or suspect. And that is a moment, you know. That is, I think the word I would use is jeopardy. You've got right-wing media in this country which has been left with little choice but to double down on the disasters it's delivered to the population, whether you're talking about Boris Johnson or Liz Truss or Brexit or austerity. They can hardly all put their hands up now and say, I'm terribly sorry. We let the sort of xenophobic genie out of the bottle in order to achieve our own political ends, and we can't get it back in again now. We didn't expect Elon Musk to turn up and turbocharge the genie, but that's what he's done. We can't turn around and say, sorry, we've made a terrible mistake. We now have to double down on this kind of rhetoric, this far-right rhetoric, this great replacement theory conspiracy. You've got James Cleverly joining in. You've got Robert Jenrick joining in. You've got the victims of hideous crimes being politicised and weaponised in a way which, again, the leader of the last inquiry, Professor Alexis Jay, has essentially pleaded with public figures not to do, begging people not to politicise the plight of victims, but to prioritise the prevention of future crimes, saying in terms that an inquiry would delay that. So Professor Alexis Jay, who isn't infallible, but she's done more work in this field than any other public servant, has said to the British people, if we have another inquiry now, we will be postponing the protection of potential future victims. So what does Nigel Farage do? Pops up and says he's going to have his own. The leader of the last inquiry, the leading expert in this field, the person who has dedicated more woman hours to investigating these events, both on a national scale and specifically in Rotherham, has said in terms that another inquiry would postpone the protection of potential future victims. It would delay the implementation of the recommendations that I have made, including, incidentally, a recommendation that laws are introduced to force owners of tech platforms like Twitter to do more to protect children, to do more to keep filth off screens. I don't know how interesting a wrinkle that is, or indeed the idea that if the online safety bill passes, then it could involve enormous financial penalties for tech platforms or the owners of tech platforms that fail to do so. But something has changed. I don't know if you thought I sounded naive yesterday. I was a little bit glib, perhaps, when I said to you that I was pretty sure that Theresa May would have condemned Musk's comments about Jess Phillips. Who knows what Liz Truss would have said? That's when I was a little bit glib. I said they'd ask her to condemn Jess Phillips's, the condemnation of Jess Phillips, the attack on Jess Phillips, and Liz Truss would likely reply, beans on toast, please, with grated cheese. Such is her grasp on reality these days. But then, live on air, I stumbled across a tweet she'd posted that essentially didn't just join in the attack, it sort of launched a new line of attack on the safeguarding minister, even using the phrase, you can tell what side she's on, or words to that effect, to which Elon Musk replied approvingly, which presumably was the point that Liz Truss the entire point of her intervention. So you've got, and don't laugh at me, please. Well, you can if you want. We could all do with a smile. Cleverly's the one that disappoints me the most. I know the curse of O'Brien has been quite a comical thing over the years. Every time I find warm words to say about a Tory, they end up disgracing themselves in public, probably most obviously in the case of Matt Hancock. But I honestly thought James Cleverly was better than this. I really did. I don't understand what's happened to the Conservative Party when now is a time for national unity. You can leave Farage doing his Morris dancing on the side of the stage or whatever it is he does this week, but British parliamentary sovereignty, to use the word in a slightly more sensible way that you might otherwise encounter, demands that an attack by a foreign conspiracy theorist upon our politicians be condemned. And it hasn't been. I don't do this very often. How significant a moment do you think this is? 0345 6060973. We've got this thing, haven't we, that I think is a self-protection mechanism. I think that's how the really bad stuff happens. I think that those of us who recognise the importance of plurality or democracy or even decency, I think we work a little bit too hard to persuade ourselves that deep down everybody else is more or less like us, you know? And that's how the really bad stuff happens. Because obviously we're not all the same. The really bad stuff didn't happen with huge majorities of the country shouting against it. Donald Trump just got re-elected as president in the United States of America, despite essentially inciting a violent coup against his own vice president, against his own country, against his own seat of power. He got re-elected. People are not sufficiently troubled by that or the multiple felonies or the multifarious allegations of sexual misconduct. That is not happening by accident. The really bad stuff happens when people like me try to persuade ourselves, people like you try to persuade ourselves that it can't be as bad as it looks. And today is one of the days when I wonder whether actually it is. I wonder whether actually it is as bad as it looks. When somebody like, and I don't know why I'm focusing on James Cleverly more than the others. I expect nothing, I suppose, from Robert Jenrick or Liz Truss, hideous opportunists. But when and the leadership, of course, sent Jenrick out to do interviews this morning, despite, or perhaps because of his comments, essentially maligning everybody in this country from a specific demographic. That's mainstream politics now. It's politics so vile that even Farage manages to sort of duck under the line by disassociating himself from Stephen Yaxley Lennon at a time when Robert Jenrick could almost be writing Yaxley Lennon's speeches. Robert Jenrick has made the extraordinary decision to try to make Farage look respectable. But it's not that I want to talk about today. It's the failure. It's the failure of the opposition, the failure of Her Majesty's opposition to condemn a far-right conspiracy theorist disparaging and insulting the British Prime Minister. And I think for my purposes, or in terms of the stuff that really interests me, the complicity of the British media in this. Where is patriotism now? Where is sovereignty? A man whose power and influence rests entirely upon the size of his fortune and his ownership of a loss-making platform is influencing British politics in a way I can't remember ever seeing before. And all the people who claim that they didn't welcome foreign interference in British politics are cheering him to the rafters. I'm going to open the phone lines. 0345 6060973. Can you persuade me that this is not a moment of genuine jeopardy for this country? I think you can. I hope you can. And now's your chance to do so. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060973. How serious a moment is this when Her Majesty's opposition don't just fail to condemn an attack by a foreign far-right conspiracy theorist on British Parliament itself, on British sovereignty, they don't just fail to condemn it, but they actively join in. How worried should we be? It's 10:23.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's minutes after 10. There's two things going on. There is the failure of politicians, with the exception of Ed Davey, actually, who aren't in the governing party, to condemn what Elon Musk is doing. And there is then the complicity of much of the British media. I never know how interested you are in the second bit. It's an area of enduring fascination for me. But the first bit, which I got so horribly wrong yesterday. Would Boris Johnson have condemned Elon Musk for this? Unlikely, I suppose. I thought Liz Truss might have done, which was just incredibly stupid of me. I genuinely believe James Cleverly would do. And then he did the opposite. So what is... I can't quite say what is going on, but is this as significant a moment as some people feel? Let me read what the rather splendid commentator and journalist Ian Dunt has to say on the subject, someone who I find frequently compelling, but again, as with everybody else in the public space and in the private space, he is not infallible. Today is an object lesson in the radicalisation of the British right-wing press. Britain is being disparaged and insulted by a foreign far-right conspiracy theorist, but the Mail, the Express, the Telegraph and even the Times choose to focus their criticism on the British Prime Minister instead. This is a moment of acute danger. They are basically mainstreaming far-right rhetoric, washing it, combing its hair, making it presentable. Conservative MPs, from moderate figures like James Cleverly to Enoch Powell caricatures like Robert Jenrick, are doing the same thing. Musk's rhetoric is classic great replacement theory combined with extremely emotive material about rape. If your response to that is to focus on your domestic enemies rather than the moral horror of his output, you are part of the problem. Alan's in Bury. Alan, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, did you watch Newsnight last night, James?
No, I didn't.
Well, you had Nick Watton, who's basically got his ear to the ground, and
yes.
apparently the government are horrified. And he specifically mentioned, I mean, us and the Americans, we joined at the hip on intelligence, especially on the Five Eyes system.
Yes.
And there's two massive defence projects, again, with the Americans, which is the AUKUS submarine program with the Australians to replace it's the next generation of submarines, and also BAE Systems with the Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35. Again, if it all goes south, that's going to have implications for intelligence, for defence cooperation, where since, basically World War II, we have cooperated with the Americans, and how much the Americans
Starmer has I mean, for reasons that possibly become easier to understand given what you've just told us, Starmer is determined to keep relations with Trump cordial. I don't know how long Musk is going to be able to stay in the tent when two egos of that size start rubbing up against each other. But what, I'm a big fan of Nick Watt. I had the pleasure of working with him for a while. What was he saying that they were horrified about the prospect of a rupture with the White House, or horrified about the thing I'm keener to focus on today, which is the failure of their parliamentary colleagues to condemn these vicious and unhinged attacks?
Well, no, what I think, as I remember, what Nick Watt was saying was, this is coming from what could be a major figure in the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Now, is this Elon Musk gone rogue, or is he speaking on behalf of Trump? And nobody knows at the moment. Will Trump come out and just say, well, Elon's Elon, ha ha ha? But on your second point, James, I'm a Labour man. You know that, I've been on your programme before. We were warned about this after the election. We said, the Conservatives, it will come down to culture wars with reform. It will get bad. And this is what. And the thing is, where's the decency now in the Conservative Party?
I think that should have been my question this morning. Actually,
yeah. I mean, you had what's he called? Is it David Lidington?
I don't know.
He was basically the deputy PM under Theresa May, and he was on. I think he was listening to Radio 4 last night, and he was saying basically that the stuff against Jess Phillips is an absolute disgrace.
I mean, it just objectively is. This is where I got stuck yesterday, because If it was a Conservative politician that was being maligned in this way by Elon Musk, I wouldn't hesitate to call it out for the horror show that it clearly is, and nor would Keir Starmer. Say what you like about Keir Starmer. He did it a few times actually under the last 2 or 3 Tory leaders, where he would make a point of saying, "You have my full support on this. This is a matter of national importance, where party political interest must be abandoned." And even if there was a case, which there isn't, for arguing that Labour has been derelict on this, anything that Keir Starmer stands accused of over the last 5 months, the Tories could be accused of over the last 14 years.
Yeah, when they've done nothing. And James, Keir Starmer's put people away. And no politician has done more. I mean, I was a magistrate for 12 years, James.
Right.
I've sat in domestic violence courts. I've seen violence again. I've seen. I didn't like sitting in them, and no one has done more to speak out than Jess Phillips. And when you get that, I was going to nearly swear then, when you get that fool Musk calling her a rape genocide apologist or something.
7 women, Alan, including 3 survivors of the Telford sexual abuse scandal, have co-signed a letter defending Jess Phillips, describing her as having devoted her life to fighting for women and girls, and expressing the belief that you've just shared, that nobody has done more. "We write as victims of extreme violence, male violence," the letter said. "What connects us all beyond our shared trauma is the support and kindness we have received from Jess Phillips over many years, personally and as activists fighting for change. We know there are those who would weaponize our pain for their own ends or political gain." Whether they thought anybody would be opportunistic enough to announce their own inquiry when they wrote that, I don't know. "Who speak out with newfound interest, not to tackle the horrendous crimes that stole so much from us, but to further their own agenda. They should hang their heads in shame." Briefly, because I'm late for the news, how serious a moment do you think this is?
It's very serious.
It's not going to pass, and we're not going to sit here in a fortnight and wonder what we were all getting so worried about.
I don't think so. But the thing is going on about, why is it always women in Parliament more than anything else? When you think of Diane Abbott, Angie Rayner, Jess Phillips, why is all this vitriol always against women? Apart from obviously Keir, but he's a PM. But and the thing is, as someone once said, there's a plaque in the Commons to Joe Cox, who was assassinated by a right-wing terrorist.
Yes.
And if you go any MP's office now, James, they're now actually partitioned off.
And that's another reason why you would expect all politicians to move as one. Perhaps a tiny little side order of opportunism from the usual suspects, but a consensus from the established figures, from the political establishment, if you like, a consensus that this is not acceptable. Ed Davey has broken the line, as it were, as an opposition politician, and he has now been personally targeted by Elon Musk. I'm looking at a picture of a list of politicians with one name circled, and Elon Musk saying, remember their names at the next election. It is 10:34. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Policeman, didn't it? You could tell how old you were getting because all the policemen were getting younger. With me, it's often political commentators. I mentioned one already, Ian Dunt. Another of my all-time favourites is a chap called Stephen Bush, who plies his trade at the Financial Times. He makes a superb point, citing that very dishonest Daily Telegraph front page. Starmer calls for grooming probe our far right. Deeply, deeply disingenuous, deliberately dishonest, but hardly surprising, given the Telegraph's recent track record. But listen to this. This is Stephen imagining he is in the category he's about to describe. And it speaks directly to the question I'm going to ask you next. He writes, I'm retired. I voted UKIP in 2014, Conservative in 2015, did not vote in 2017, Tory again in 2019. In 2024, I voted Reform. I think immigration is too high. The last Conservative government was the worst ever, and London is a foreign land. Why is today moving me back towards the Tories? That is one answer to the question of why no Tories have condemned this appalling attack on Jess Phillips. It's so obviously appalling. Possibly, to begin with, we'll step away from the question of why some of them have joined in I don't want to become obsessed with James Cleverly, who, of course, was sitting in this chair a week ago yesterday. But I'm not shocked by what Robert Jenrick has done. I shouldn't be shocked by what Liz Truss has done. I am shocked by the simple failure to condemn. We've had some success in the past when confining callers to people who see themselves as traditional conservatives. How the hell do you make sense of this? Respectable traditional conservatives, whether One Nation or otherwise. Why is your party not condemning this vicious, dishonest attack upon a woman held up by victims of sexual violence as the politician who has done more to help them than any other? Why is your party not condemning it and or going along with it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Frank's in Carlisle. Frank, what would you like to say?
Morning, Happy New Year.
Thank you, you too.
I think the reason that the Conservatives didn't step up en masse and condemn this,
or not even en masse, mate. One of them would be good.
Yeah, they saw what Elon did, and I'd put Farage in this boat as well. They saw what Elon did for Trump. They took somebody who most people said wasn't going to win, applied the Twitter. I don't want to say the X Factor because that just sounds like cheap. But anyway, they applied that, and he applied money, and Trump won. And I think they all just want a slice of it, so they're not going to tread on his toes. They're just playing coach. They're scared of him. When you ask, is this a big deal?
Yeah.
I think as far as the Conservative Party is, it just demonstrates that we're left with the dregs. We haven't got any of the good ones left anymore. I'm not a Conservative voter, but I don't see Cameron or Theresa May putting up with anything like that.
Cameron would have a role to play, wouldn't he, on this?
Yeah, Theresa May wouldn't have put up with that.
No, I don't think she would, although
I don't think she would.
I'm not clinging with great confidence to any of my positive thoughts about Tory politicians at the moment. I like your Musk analysis. I should have spotted that a little bit sooner. It's pure opportunism. Dominic Grieve, a former Tory Attorney General, has pushed back, has attacked. But people like Cameron and May, prioritising party fortunes over common decency? Because it's not like they're going to be Prime Minister again, or in Cameron's case, even back in the House of Commons.
I would like to see a lot of ex-Tories, the former, everybody with former at the start of their job title. Yes. They should all be stepping up and saying something at this stage. It's not just here. You've got Elon Musk. He's posting there's elections coming up in Germany, and he's encouraging people to the far right.
Yes.
He's basically pushing global politics to the far right. And that's some Bond villain stuff, that is.
This is where that thing kicks in, that impulse I was trying to describe earlier, that I think probably does help explain the really bad stuff, whether it's the rise of fascism or the rise of the Nazis or the imposition of, maybe apartheid's a bad example, actually, although pertinent in one sense. But we sit here, I use we very loosely, not wringing our hands necessarily, certainly engaging, taking the fight, if you like, to some of the worst offenders, but not quite believing that they could ever take the public with them. Not quite believing that neighbour would ever turn on neighbour, which, of course, happened in Yugoslavia not long ago. Not quite believing when there's so much historical evidence that we're wrong. But we have to, I don't know, is it the psychic toll that it takes? We have to convince ourselves things aren't quite as bad as they seem to be because the alternative is so bleak.
I mean, when we looked at what he posted, it was on BBC News at 10. It was, they put 3 of his quotes up and read them out as if they'd been written by a madman. It was actually quite critical for the BBC, I felt. Starmer was complicit in the rape of Britain. They did that one. Jess Phillips is a rape genocide apologist. I don't know where he's getting genocide from.
No.
I can understand from his twisted mind why he thinks she's a rape apologist, but why he just threw genocide in there as well.
Yes.
That's just to stir people up.
That's the far right stuff. This is the thing that the editor of the Times is pretending not to understand today, or the editor of the Telegraph is pretending not to understand today. The insertion of the word genocide, even some broadcasters pretending not to understand today, the insertion of the word genocide is the bit that makes it far right. It's a lie when he says rape apologist. When he says genocide rape apologist, it becomes part of the Great Replacement theory. It becomes far right. That's so obvious.
And then you've got America should liberate the people of Britain from their tyrannical government. Now, we sitting over here will look at that and go, don't be stupid. But if you're in America, how do you know what our government's like? The vast majority of people getting their news off Twitter are not looking much deeper. So they're seeing that and they're saying, wow,
And this is why, although it's a bit simplistic, the idea of Musk having been radicalized by his own platform at the moment is one of the only facts that fits the space available. The accounts that are dedicated to spreading, footage of foreign people committing crimes and pretending that all crimes are committed by foreigners or that all foreigners are criminals and that there are no-go areas. But we used to laugh about the no-go areas. I wonder how many Americans believe that there are no-go areas in Britain or that London has a Muslim problem or that any of these issues are recognisable to the people who actually live here. So from the point of view of the Tories, under your analysis, they ain't going to be changing course anytime soon.
No, I don't think so. I think I would have said, unless he said something really stupid, but he has said some unimaginably stupid things, and they're all still smiling and nodding. So, this is just showing that all we have left of the Tory party that I remember is just the dregs.
Listen, I'm a chronicler and a valuer of British politics. I'm with Churchill on that. I think it is the least bad of all the available options, but it seems to be creaking. It seems to be under threat. If the leader of the opposition and all of her colleagues fail to issue any form of condemnation of this kind of commentary, you could hear Farage struggling this morning briefly, when he was asked about being a rape genocide apologist and sought to defend it on the grounds of free speech. I mean, incredibly, he even brought me into the conversation, as if anything I ever say about anyone could be in any way compared to calling someone a rape genocide apologist with absolutely no evidence, grounds or rationale whatsoever. So you know what desperation looks like, and opportunism. But you expect better from His Majesty's. Thank you to Roger for pointing out that I've now twice said Her Majesty's. You expect better from His Majesty's opposition. If you voted Tory at the last election, what do you make of this? Because you've already, in a sense, rejected the extremism of Farage, and yet you've ended up with something that Samuel Kasumu, Boris Johnson's former race advisor, argued yesterday is worse. Because Jenrick isn't some fringe figure, I don't think, is he? He's got a shadow post, hasn't he? He's yeah. So you voted Tory at the last election. You'd rejected the extremism, the opportunism and the dishonesty of Nigel Farage. And you've ended up with worse. How do you make sense of what's going on? 0345 606 0973. It's 10:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Keir Starmer currently has two choices. You get on with implementing the recommendations of Jay and tackling child abuse, protecting future potential victims, or you have another inquiry at considerable money and time cost with unspecified goals and aims. If you want option two, you should probably try and explain and justify those various costs, because Professor Alexis Jay, the chair of the public inquiry into child sexual abuse, says that another inquiry is not needed and would delay action. This quote is crucial. The time has passed for more inquiries. We've had enough. We've set out action required, and people should get on with it nationally and locally. The alternative is something that's always underpins extremism. And I should say this isn't just far-right extremism. I'm getting messages suggesting that Jess Phillips doesn't deserve to be protected because of her record on everything from transgender issues to Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. So it's not just the far right who are failing to uphold common decency in the context of Elon Musk's treatment of Jess Phillips. It's their adjacent far left equivalents as well. But when she says that, you see what Starmer's choices are. If he was an opportunist, he'd just call an inquiry, spend another 60 or 70 million quid in full knowledge that it would achieve nothing, but in order to shut up these kind of voices. Even if it involves Elon Musk and Nigel Farage dancing around for 10 minutes claiming that it's a consequence of their interventions. Not a single thought for any victims. Which brings us back to the Tories. And the question I have for you today, of why are they not condemning Elon Musk? They could even continue to call for an inquiry while ducking the questions of why they didn't call one themselves in 14 years of actual government. So even if we didn't hold their feet to the fire over that completely crucial question, that completely dismantles the position of every single one of them. But even if you let that pass, as every right-wing journalist in the country is currently doing, while simultaneously forgetting that Boris Johnson described all inquiries effectively into historic child sexual abuse spaffing money up the wall, But the client journalists who cheered him to Westminster and beyond are curiously silent about that, as of course is Nigel Farage, who liberally greased Johnson's passage into Downing Street. So even if you let that go, and I don't think we should, but even if you let that epic hypocrisy and dishonesty go and focus exclusively on the Jess Phillips question, they could simply say, I do think there should be another inquiry, brackets, please don't ask me, about 14 years of power, the last one, our own failure to call one, or Boris Johnson's comments, close brackets. So I do think there should be another inquiry, but I categorically condemn Elon Musk's attack upon my parliamentary colleague and tireless campaigner for women's rights and women's safety, Jess Phillips. So why aren't they doing that? And if you voted Tory at the last election, I really want you to tell me your answer to that question. And if you can't answer it, because I'm not sure I can, I want you to tell me how you feel about it. You rejected the seductive lies of reform because you thought the Tories were somehow more respectable. And now the party of Jenrick and Badenoch has arguably, as Boris Johnson's former race advisor argued yesterday, has arguably moved further to the right on this issue. Sharon is in York. Sharon, what would you like to say?
I would like to point out that, bear in mind, the Conservatives have a proud history of having 3 female prime ministers.
Yes.
It's quite disappointing that nobody on the front benches yesterday for the Conservative Party condemned the comments against Jess Phillips for what they appear to be, to me, which is misogynistic.
Yes, I mean, at the very least, they're misogynistic. Genocide rape apologist is obviously libelous as well, potentially, and deeply, deeply dishonest. But I don't know. You could accuse a man of being those things, I suppose, couldn't you?
Potentially, but we have to remember the context. The context is the comments were aired against a woman who is a minister of the Crown and is also someone with a history of working in domestic violence and rape protection. And I think it's really disappointing that nothing was done.
Why do you think they're failing? Do you lean more towards the Conservatives historically than other parties or not, Sharon?
I would say yes.
Okay.
I'm more of a centralist, but I found it quite shocking. I feel that there has been a lot of reports into group-based sexual exploitation. From 2015, there was a report that was commissioned by the is it the Children's Commissioner, Children's Welfare
Louise
Commissioner?
Casey, I think. I mean, there's been several actually.
And there was also Ella Coburn's report in 2020, which was commissioned by UCL, which looked into this and looked into the specific issue around supposedly grooming gangs. It's not a term I like to use.
I'm comfortable with it. Just for the record, I understand why you're not, but I am.
Yeah, well, no, I'm very uncomfortable with that term.
No, I'm comfortable with the term. I just wanted to say that, but for the avoidance of doubt, I completely respect your right not to be comfortable with it. But the more you read into it, the more suitable it may be. A little mild in some ways, grooming actually. But I take your point, and of course you've also got the Common Affairs Select Committee, and I think 2013 describing Keir Starmer as having striven to improve the treatment of victims of sexual assault within the criminal justice system throughout his term as director of the DPP. Unlike many other official agencies implicated in this issue, the CPS, of which he was the head, readily admitted that victims had been let down by them and have attempted both to discover the cause of this systematic failure and to improve the way things are done so as to avoid a repetition of such events. So a 2013 report from the Home Affairs Committee, which would have had a majority of Tories on it, given who was in government at the time, found that what he inherited, he recognised, described and sought to fix. And the Tories are now pretending, if pretending is the right word to use, that he's somehow remiss or somehow done something wrong. On the specific case of Jess Phillips, why do you think somebody like James Cleverly is failing to do the right thing, or even a Theresa May, Sharon?
I think within the party there's this fear of populism and that people feel they need to lurch towards it as if it's going to, I don't know, save the party or make it or improve it. And I think that's wrong. And I think it's a really dangerous position. I think but I think statistics don't lie. I think you have to look at what actually happened in all the group-based sexual exploitation cases, and the facts don't lie, stats don't lie. All the reports say the same thing, that it is actually predominantly, and I hate to say it, white men that perpetrate the biggest perpetrators of these crimes. And I think trying to dress it up as something else is just playing to the audience and trying to move towards a more popularist position.
Well, here's Jenrick. I don't know if you've seen, and you're talking more broadly about the incidences of child sexual abuse and the ethnicity of the people responsible.
Yeah.
This is Robert Jenrick. This appalling affair is the final nail in the coffin for liberals who still cling to the argument that Britain is an integration success story. The scandal started with the onset of mass migration, importing hundreds of thousands of people from alien cultures who possess medieval attitudes towards women, brought us here. So, however many offenders there actually are, Robert Jenrick thinks everybody from a certain background. I don't know what background he means. I saw a rather splendid commentator yesterday describing his Orthodox Jewish grandparents as having never learned the language and lived in sex segregation for much of their lives, whether or not they're the kind of people that Robert Jenrick would want to have removed from the country. But that's him. That's what he is appealing to. He's appealing to the Enoch Powell BNP demographic. Why are people who are no longer ambitious staying silent? That's the bit I don't get.
Again, it's not for me to put myself in other people's minds or try to put words in their mouth.
You can if you want.
I think that's really unfair.
Okay.
I could if I wished, but for me, I feel it's more about, I think, for me, it is hugely disappointing, and I think ultimately it does the party no favours in the long run. I think that is a huge concern.
Yeah, and how significant a moment this is something we can continue to contemplate. But of course, you won't know the answer to that question for a long time. It is coming up to 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'll read one little message from Idiot's Corner. James O'Brien, what a hypocrite. You spent what felt like 4 hours at the start of your show with a boring monologue about how foreign media personalities shouldn't get involved in British politics, yet you take every chance you can to criticise Donald Trump and his election by the American public. So it's okay for you to do it, but not Elon Musk, pot kettle black. You've completely misunderstood, Simon. It's about how important or how seriously you take interventions from people like Elon Musk and how you respond to blatant lies and dishonest conspiracy theories. It wasn't me that said people shouldn't get involved in British politics. It was Nigel Farage.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Who should we be focusing on, I wonder, when it comes to the Conservative politicians that you would expect to speak out in defence of Jess Phillips? I don't even know if this is the single most important element of the whole conversation, but it's the one I'm most exercised by. I think partly because it happened live on air. I don't know if you know what that's like. I don't know what it's like at your end of the microphone, but when I stumble across something that truly shocks me, and I'm sitting here as opposed to sitting on the bus or sitting on the sofa, I think it hits harder. I think it lands differently. And yesterday when I found what you sent me, actually, that post from Trust that was, I should probably read it to you again. It was truly hideous in both tone and intent. And albeit that she's no longer a player on the British political stage, having been handed her sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap by her own constituents, it spoke of a deeper malaise, didn't it? It spoke of a cancer at the heart of the Conservative Party that Kemi Badenoch seems supremely ill-equipped to remove. And I wonder how much of her inability to remove it is actually an unwillingness to remove it, because Robert Jenrick remains in post, having maligned hundreds of thousands of people whose forebears came here from overseas. A description which, of course, applies to many members of his own party. So who would speak up? So prior to 2019, the list of Conservatives who would condemn this would have been quite long, I think. You'd have seen Dominic Grieve on that list, wouldn't you? You'd have seen David Gauke on that list, wouldn't you? You'd have seen Rory Stewart on that list, I think. You'd have seen Philip Hammond on that list. You'd have seen, I think, you'd have seen Anna Soubry on that list. I could go on. You'd have seen Michael Heseltine on that list. You'd have seen, I think, Nicholas Soames on that list. Conservatives who would hear or read what Elon Musk has said about Jess Phillips, rape genocide apologist, you'd expect Farage to be refusing to condemn it, but you'd be expecting the massive majority of Conservative MPs to be leading the line, in much the same way that if Elon Musk said something like that about, Alicia Kearns, then Labour MPs would be queuing up to condemn those comments. It's that classic thing, isn't it? I can disagree with you about almost everything, but there are lines that must not be crossed. And when you hear people negotiating on where those lines are, that was the other element of Starmer's speech yesterday. That he said, that's why I think the line has been crossed. The problem with crossing lines is that if the media is corrupt or complicit, then the line moves. And that is why I'm asking you today how serious a moment you think this is. When the media is corrupt or complicit or both, and we know that client journalism, sponsored by largely foreign billionaires, has given us austerity, given us Brexit, given us Boris Johnson, given us Liz Truss's budget. When the media is complicit in the crossing of the line, then the line moves. When the political establishment, or half of the political establishment, is complicit in the crossing of the line. So when Starmer spoke yesterday about the crossing of the line, he was speaking about the hideous words, utterly unfounded, directed at Jess Phillips. That's what he meant. The line has been crossed. You could hear Farage on with Nick Ferrari earlier today, desperately trying to pretend that a line hasn't been crossed, that somehow maligning a woman in this way, a woman who, it was reported yesterday, has already had seen one person arrested for issuing threats against her, somehow is an exercise of free speech. And you know that he's right. You know Starmer is right. The line has been crossed. And the thing about the line is it protects everybody except the weapons-grade opportunists and liars who hate the line. They're just usually very adept at walking it, very adept at dancing on the line, right on the line. Robert Jenrick has crossed the line. Elon Musk has crossed the line. It's beholden on everybody who values the line to agree with Keir Starmer and to condemn what Elon Musk has done, which is why, and I don't like to over-personalise the programme. I can hear you sniggering, but I really don't. Maybe I'm sounding nuts today. Maybe you don't think this is as important as I worry it might be. And obsessing about the Conservatives at a time when, in some ways, they're bit part players in this pageant, but they are the opposition. And they are failing to pretend to protect their parliamentary colleagues from vicious and potentially insightful abuse. So why aren't they doing it? Who might you expect? Let's name some names, shall we? Who might you expect to do better? Theresa May sits in the House of Lords. David Cameron sits in the House of Lords. George Osborne sits on countless boards. That wasn't meant to rhyme. Who else? David Davis is normally a big one for civil liberties, isn't he? Ian Duncan Smith? Jacob Rees-Mogg. I know he got fired as well at the last election, but aren't him and Jess Phillips tight? Aren't they close? I think that's one of the reasons the far left don't think that Jess Phillips deserves to be protected from this sort of abuse. Jacob Rees-Mogg might come out and condemn what has been said about Jess Phillips if he had any moral backbone. Who might you expect? So the key question now, as we move into the second hour, got sort of three questions really. The first for this hour is, why are the Tories doing this? And if you voted Tory at the last election, I really want to know how you feel about this failure to engage in the most basic and common of decency. All right, 0345 6060 973. Number two, who should, who could? Sitting Tories in the House of Commons or the House of Lords, or prominent figures in the Tory constellation, who could come out, who are you most disappointed by? Let's do it like that. Who are you most disappointed by? Because you know my answer to that is James Cleverly. Who are you most disappointed by? I'm going to play you a little clip of Jess Phillips in a moment, and I'm going to read you some of the words shared today by people that she's helped in the past, victims of child sexual abuse, victims of violence against women, victims of misogynistic bile. And I'm going to ask who you're most disappointed by. chiefly, I want to know why you think they're doing this or failing to do this. Ken Clark, another one from Nick, you're absolutely right. He could lead the line on this. And secondly, or rather thirdly, how serious a moment is this? Because I do this for a living. I could be getting a bit unduly carried away. How serious a moment is this? But first, here's a little reminder of Jess Phillips's record in this sort of arena.
I want everybody in here to know that they are about to vote for a bill that they have absolutely no idea how much it's going to cost. Like, we haven't been given that information. I was in for the committee stage of the debate. Earlier, and the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee said that there was a view that each person that was sent to Rwanda would cost £169,000. And it piqued my anger so greatly because I had just come from an event with the Home Secretary around it being a year on from the independent child sexual abuse inquiry and what progress we have made since then. And I was holding in my hand a piece of paper that said that in 2022, 100,000 children were sexually abused and came forward and said it. And then I looked up how much money the Home Office was allocating for their Sexual Abuse Against Children Fund in 2022, and it was £4.5 million, which I worked out was £42 for every child who'd been raped in that year. And I thought, what political capital of walking round and round and round and round for now the third bill for something that won't work. And 150 judges can be found yesterday under the sofa by the Prime Minister when cases in my constituency of rape victims waiting 7 years to get in front of a judge. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, people who think that the amount of time spent on wasting taxpayers' money on something that hasn't worked the last 2 times we tried it and will not work this time, frankly, Mr. Speaker, should be ashamed of themselves for voting for something when they don't have any idea how much it's going to cost the people in their constituencies. I hope they feel shame for the amount of airtime and the amount who turned up today, but not for the victims of child abuse. Excuse me, would you like to intervene? No. The other thing I want to say is that I was in a British court last week, not a foreign court, a British court. I was in a British court with a victim of human trafficking. She'd been trafficked twice. We deported her once already as a trafficking victim, and she was re-trafficked back to this country. And I went to the upper tribunal with her last week. She has 2 children born of the repeated rapes that she suffered as a victim of human trafficking. And the Home Office was trying to deport her again, to which the judge scolded the Home Office lawyers for daring to bring it in front of them. And because I was sat in the courtroom, the Home Office lawyers were not so keen to give their evidence in front of me, so they didn't really give any. Yeah, I wonder why. They didn't want to talk about how it was fine for a woman who'd been ritually raped repeatedly and repeatedly to have to go back to the country where that had happened and she had been trafficked to here. I have heard nothing today in any of the debates about when we scoop up all these people without any appeal, what happens to the victims of human trafficking? What happens to them? Because currently I've sat in courtrooms where this government is abusing them.
And of course members of that government would have included James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick and others. It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. That was Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, talking about the time she spent in courtrooms with victims of misogynistic violence, victims of rape. There perhaps should have been a trigger warning at the beginning of that, for which I apologise. That's the woman that Elon Musk describes as a genocide rape apologist. And if you are watching the footage, the video footage, as opposed to simply the audio clip of that, I wonder if you can guess who was sitting directly opposite her as she made that speech. I'll tell you after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10 minutes after 11, it was James Cleverly sitting opposite Jess Phillips. And impossible, whatever you may think of other people's politics, impossible not to register the authenticity, the sincerity in Jess Phillips's defence of women there, which is why Keir Starmer made her safeguarding minister, which is why it is beholden upon anybody with a claim to even the most basic common decency to defend her from the vicious attacks that she's currently suffering from Elon Musk. But James Cleverly has failed to do so. Indeed, he's added to the fire. Robert Jenrick has gone further. Kemi Badenoch has sat on her hands. Which Tory is going to do the right thing, do you think? And is it really feasible that none of them would have the courage to do so? Ed Davey has. He's called for the US ambassador to the UK to be summoned by the Foreign Ministry after Elon Musk comments, because, of course, he is heavily linked to, integral to the incoming Trump administration. So Ed Davey's done the right thing, I think, and I can't check, and I'm not on there enough to keep a close eye on things because it's unnavigable now for people like me. Musk's platform, but I think Musk has now targeted Ed Davey for abuse. At what point does Nigel Farage's principle about foreign plutocrats interfering in British politics, at what point can it be fairly described as abandoned? He's now attacking the leader of the Liberal Democrats. He's attacked the Prime Minister. But remember, when Barack Obama expresses an honest opinion that's been proved completely right about the consequences of the Brexit that Nigel Farage wasn't asked about once this morning, that's an appalling infringement. That's absolutely deeply wrong. Should not be tolerated at all. You couldn't make it up, could you? And sadly, I'm not. Richard is in Brentford. Sorry to keep you, Richard. What prompted you to pick up the phone?
Well, you probably wouldn't ask me that question because it was the last hour.
You should be. If you're not used to the length of my intro, but then you never will be. Go on, see if you can remember.
Well, that cheered me up because I was getting so depressed.
Yes.
Just thinking about all this. It's terrible, isn't it? I mean, the original reason, I'll be very quick, is I used to work for Keir Starmer in the CPS.
Okay.
I didn't like him actually, to be honest with you, very much. But I can't think of anybody who did more to improve the way we dealt with historical rapes and historical child abuse. He did a massive amount. And people like Musk haven't got a clue about that level of detail. They come out with these easy comments. But, like him or not, Starmer did a huge amount in this field, and it's totally wrong to criticise.
You speak as a former colleague, and I've already cited the 2013 report from the Home Affairs Committee, which said that he had striven to improve the treatment of victims of sexual assault within the criminal justice system, and also credited him for having taken over and then acknowledged and admitted that victims had been let down in the past.
They're being let down now, James. They're being let down now.
Of course they are. And that's why the implementation of the recommendations in the J report should be urgent, as opposed to being postponed so that they can have another inquiry for reasons that they're unable to articulate.
Absolutely right. But they're not being let down just because of Starmer. It's the system. The system is so demanding of... in order to get a conviction, you've got to have so much evidence. So, I mean, I used to take decisions not to proceed with the case, not because I didn't want to. Everything in my being, wanted to help the people involved. But I had to think, what are the judges going to say? Is this going to win?
I think this is such a crucial part of the conversation that has been almost entirely absent. So all of the things that have been found to have happened. There was a failure to properly pursue because of attitudes towards some of the young women involved, because of fears of allegations or accusations of racism, because of foot dragging. All of that is true, but absolutely crucial to this is the simple fact that the statistics support is that when these cases cross the desk of the CPS, they're often not progressed, even though people like you may be convinced of the perpetrator's guilt, because the likelihood of securing a conviction is close to zero.
Yeah, I know people were guilty who we didn't prosecute and who got off. And there are lots of devices like splitting up separate cases instead of presenting one big case involving, say, 3 victims, which would have made it stronger. As soon as that kind of case is split up, each case is you can't proceed with it. And these aren't decisions that prosecutors like to make. And in fact, the whole reason why the CPS was formed is because the judges were complaining, this was back in 86, that too many weak cases came before them. And they designed the CPS to filter out these weak cases. So it's just ignorant to criticise one man and so incorrectly. And certainly from across the water. I mean, Musk's an absolute isn't he? If I can say that word.
I don't think you can say that word. And no one now, because we've activated the button. So unfortunately, no one will know what word it is that you did just say that I could categorically say you're not allowed to say on this programme, even under the rules of free speech. Pertinent.
Wasn't that rude?
No, I know, but Ofcom is a wonderful organisation to which we should all. It was the word that Danny Dyer called David Cameron. All right, after Danny had registered what a debacle Brexit was with his trotters up so that word is the word that Richard used for people who are curious about why the dump button was just deployed. I think I'm right in saying that the very first prosecution of what we will call an Asian grooming gang took place under Keir Starmer's stewardship of the CPS.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, he really did do a massive amount. Well, it wasn't just him. Obviously,
no, I know it
was deputies and others that presented ideas. But he supported it and he pushed it on. But moving on to this hour then, can I just say this?
Yes, what about the Tories?
Yeah, and I'm just, as you were talking, I was just wondering the reasons. The two things that strike me, they're scared rigid about reform and reform getting power because Farage is developing so rapidly. So I suspect they're unwilling to upset, potential voters for his lot, which might be a factor. And the other lot is I wonder whether Jess Phillips has been so direct, sincerely. She's a sincere person,
yes,
but she has been quite direct and upset people.
Yes.
Whether that kind of personal issue gets in the way of doing the right thing.
There was beef with Liz Truss, but only after Liz Truss elected to go on a podcast presented by a man who'd talked about how he wouldn't even rape Jess Phillips. She's friends with.
Comment.
I know, that didn't stop Liz Truss from breaking bread with him, although arguably she's gone worse than that subsequently. She's friends with Jacob Rees-Mogg. It was one of those curiosities of parliamentary behaviour, wasn't it, that Jess Phillips and Jacob Rees-Mogg were supposed to be mates? I don't know who. I mean, it wouldn't stop me from defending someone I didn't like if someone came after them in the way that Elon Musk is doing with the record that Jess Phillips has got. But maybe you're right. Maybe it's personal.
And isn't the wider point? Put the boot on the other foot. If Musk was complaining about the Tories in this way, they'd squash him down, and so they should be doing it just as a matter of principle. You don't. That's my enemy over there on the other side of the house. But you don't criticise them from America, mate.
It's the line. It's the line that Starmer was talking about yesterday, and the line protects everybody. So when somebody crosses it, everybody should respond. And you might expect Farage to prevaricate and fudge, but you wouldn't expect His Majesty's opposition to be delinquent and absent in this space. Before you go, you won't answer this question, but I have to ask it. Why didn't you like him?
You'll like one of the answers.
Go on.
I tell you one thing. The good answer is he took no prisoners, so he came in, and that's why I'm really quite optimistic, because he's the kind of guy that will go in and upset people to get the right thing done. And he didn't care about what other people thought about him. I mean, he was very polite and friendly.
Sure.
When he visited. The worst reason.
Yeah.
He's an Arsenal supporter.
That's not fair. That's rubbish. That's not going to get me a paragraph in tomorrow's Daily Bugle, is it? It's not like the time someone told us about him having a fist fight with an old school friend and they were taking chunks out of each other. I had a feeling you were going to say that. And I share your optimism for the reasons that you describe. It's hard to, because he doesn't come across as anything like that in a lot of his public appearances. But the more you find out about him, the more you realise that is part of his skill set, is once he's set his sights on something for reasons of principle, he won't be distracted from it by any kind of worries about how other people might respond.
He's ruthless. And if he's got people like, in a nice way, if he's got people like Wes Streeting doing a good job, with Starmer breathing down his neck, those people are going to do a better job, because he's that kind of person.
And you speak as a former colleague, employee even. Is that the correct term? I don't know. You speak as someone who worked under him at the CPS 26 minutes after 11. That point's... Thank you, Richard. That point's really important, The statistical relevance of cases that aren't pursued. So it doesn't contradict the findings by countless inquiries, various inquiries, that fears of racism played a part in some of these failures to pursue. Although something else that I think is important to get out there is that I think so, in some cases that will be a cop-out. These young women come forward and they are often from dysfunctional or dysregulated backgrounds, and authorities often treat them with contempt. And then when inquiries come calling and say, why didn't you believe these young women when they came forward? It's quite easy to say, oh, we were worried about being accused of racism. I think that gets ignored as well. And that cop-out gets green-lit by the actions of people like Jenrick and Farage and Yaxley Lennon. Not all of it. It definitely and categorically happened. Make no mistake. Anne Cryer, the Labour MP's testimony in this space is pertinent. But it's quite a powerful get-out-of-jail-free card, isn't it? So, oh, no, we didn't pursue this. Have a listen to radio phone-ins presented by right-wing people about things like rape, even the Giselle Pellicot case, and note how quickly the conversations turn into defences of men. Or when I started in this job, High Court judges talking about the length of a girl's skirt. A colleague, I've told you, the single most disgusting thing I've ever heard on LBC was a female presenter saying that if her daughter got raped while drunk, she wouldn't take her to the police because she'd just give her a hug and tell her to be more careful next time. The blaming of women, the blaming of victims in cases of sexual violence and sexual crime is absolutely endemic. And so for a copper or a social worker to turn around having been found derelict in their duty and say, oh, I was worried about being accused of racism is incredibly powerful. So that's part of this conversation that you never hear. And the other part is that regardless of the ethnicity or the background or the identity of the culprit or the victim, a hell of a lot of cases where the Crown prosecution lawyers are convinced of the perpetrator's guilt will not go to court because they are also convinced that they will never get a conviction, which brings us back to Keir Starmer's tenure as Director of Public Prosecutions and his decision to lower the threshold, to reopen cases that predecessors had actually closed. This happened in 2011 when Nazir Afzal had been appointed by Keir Starmer as the CPS chief prosecutor in the northwest of England and reopened cases that had previously been closed, specifically on the issue of whether or not the evidence given by a victim would be considered as credible or not. And Afzal, of course, Nazir as well, has described in detail how Keir Starmer personally intervened to change the rules to make it easier for him to pursue these kinds of criminals. And I have checked, and it is true, that the very first prosecution of an Asian grooming gang was brought under the tenure of Keir Starmer as Director of Public Prosecutions. My phone lines are open for Robert Jenrick, Liz Truss, James Cleverly, or any other current member of the Conservative Party to tell me what they've done to pursue prosecutions against these kinds of... Or Nigel Farage, of course, who sadly couldn't hang around today like he did last time he was in the building. It was a shame. It's always nice to say hello. I'd love to know what they've done beyond hot air and speeches. I mean, you couldn't countenance for a moment the possibility that any of those, admittedly Truss isn't in Parliament anymore, but the other three are, Jenrick, Cleverly and Farage. You couldn't imagine for a moment, could you, that any of them wouldn't have attended the actual debate in the House of Commons about this issue last night? That surely would be a hypocritical step too far even for these characters. 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:34 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Another thing I meant to bring to your attention, but I completely forgot because I've got a brain like a Swiss cheese, is some of the stuff in Tom Baldwin's biography of Keir Starmer about the period that is under discussion in some corners of this conversation about grooming gangs and about inquiries. This is a man, arguably one of the people that's got closest to Keir Starmer, and he wrote in his recent biography, the injustice faced by victims was also beginning to alter his view about the role of the state. Instead of human rights and civil liberties merely protecting the individual from abuses of power, like false imprisonment or torture, he emphasised that victims had a right to call on the state to take steps to protect them. This new belief found expression again a few months after his meeting with the Cloughs, with the prosecution of a dozen Asian men who had sexually exploited or raped young girls in Rochdale. Given some of the racially charged commentary about grooming scandals since, it's worth pointing out that the impetus for these prosecutions came from the CPS team for North West England, led by Nazir Afzal, a British Muslim of Pakistani descent. But the story's relevance here is what it shows about the way Starmer takes decisions. Afzal initially needed to talk to him about the prosecution because it was almost unprecedented in its scale and would mean, I'm doing this in an incredibly professional way off my phone, so you're going to have to bear with me for a moment, and would mean reversing a previous decision in the case of one defendant. He was worried that the head of the CPS would be defensive or concerned it would embarrass the organisation. But he says Starmer's priority was to rectify mistakes. Look, that can't be the only one we got wrong, he told Afzal. What about the other cases that didn't get to the stage where we prosecuted? And as a consequence of that, a panel comprised of police and prosecutors looked at dozens of cases dating back 10 or even 20 years, long before Keir Starmer became Director of Public Prosecutions, extending out across other towns and cities from Rotherham to Swansea, Oxford to Glasgow, and revealed that when women and girls had gone to the police, too often they were not being taken seriously. As I started reading through the files, says Starmer, it became clear to me that the system was not working properly. This is me now, not reading. You sometimes are very kind to me and compliment me and say things like, where do you get all this stuff from? How do you know all this stuff? The answer is it's very, very easy. I'd love to claim some sort of superpower or claim the credit for some particular level of attention. Every single person you've heard opine on this issue could have found all the stuff that I've shared with you on the programme today. You helped me. The clip of Jess Phillips talking in the House of Commons about the priorities of the last government to spend millions of pounds deporting nobody to Rwanda and £48 on each victim of rape under bills that they sought to pass. You sent me that. Sometimes you bring stuff to my attention. I've got quite a good memory, but it would normally take about half an hour to assemble everything that I've shared with you today, up to and including Tom Baldwin's biography of Keir Starmer. And there it is. As I started reading through the files, it became clear to me that the system was not working properly. We had good prosecutors and decent police officers, but they were asking, will the case succeed in front of a jury, or will they make convincing witnesses? Usually these girls were from working class backgrounds. Some had been in trouble with the police and had problems with drugs or alcohol. Often they had not reported rapes to the police immediately, or had gone back to their abusers. The police were saying they will get slaughtered if we put them up to give evidence in the witness box. The problem was we were looking for the perfect victim, and almost always that was not going to include the most vulnerable people most in need of protecting. And Afzal goes on to describe how Keir Starmer led the line on turning that around. So I don't think he's capable of doing this himself. I don't think it's the way that he's built. But that there, right there, was written long before this latest bout of transatlantic opportunism and conspiracy theory. And it makes a case for arguing that Keir Starmer has probably done more than any other lawyer in this country. He certainly was in charge of the CPS when the very first prosecution of a grooming gang was made. The very first. And he's being accused of being complicit in a cover-up. And then when you read about the lowering of the evidential threshold, or rather the increase in the encouragement for CPS lawyers to take cases to court despite the fact that the police didn't think the witnesses were credible or reliable. The consequence of that is the convictions. I've also got figures in front of me that show you what those convictions look like, what those numbers actually are during his tenure as head of the DPP. And this is why yesterday I talked a lot about alternative facts. Because how does he deal with this? Someone's accusing him of being complicit in a cover-up when he presided over a complete transformation of the system that led to prosecutions of grooming gangs. It's a direct consequence of his own interventions, his own work. How does he refute that? It's insane what we're looking at. And if it wasn't for the unique status of Elon Musk, who knows where we'd be. Peter is, I know where Peter is, he's on the Wirral. Peter, what would you like to say?
Yes. Well, I've been listening to for earlier. I wanted to get on a bit earlier. But in answer to the question now about, surprised, disappointed with the silence of the Conservatives, no, not at all. No, I'm not, James. And the reason I'm not is I believe, and I've read both your books, and I've read other books on
That's a relief.
Subject.
That's a relief. That would be a very unleavened diet of literature. Go on.
Yeah, no, but I think this is like a paper trail. It's like a paper trail of where we finished at, and the paper trail has gone right throughout. If we go back to the Conservative Unionist as a body,
no, I don't buy it.
Well, no,
do you mean forever, or do you mean recently?
The recent alliteration of them.
Oh, fair enough.
The recent alliteration of them now are that they've took such a. I think your last caller mentioned something similar. They've taken such a kicking in the last election, and now reform is threatening to take over. The only thing they have left now is to use whatever tools are available to them, because they've got no answers to any of the problems facing Britain at the moment. They've got no answers to that. So they have to use whatever tools are available. And at the moment, Musk is that. Well, I was going to use the word. He's the biggest spanner in the bag, but I don't mean that as a joking thing. I mean he is this huge spanner that they can use.
The thing is that he's not saying anything that actually Lennon hasn't said. It's just that he has got the veneer of respectability that comes from epic wealth and influence, and his proximity to Donald Trump's administration. All of those may be factors in why the Tories are not behaving with a scintilla of decency. But to challenge your analysis, they could continue to pretend not to understand why people like Alexis Jay are saying there's no point having another inquiry. They could pretend not to know about the reality of the role that Keir Starmer has played in the pursuit and prosecution of these gangs, the unique role that he has played. They could continue to tell all of those lies and add Elon Musk shouldn't have said that about Jess Phillips, and they won't even do that. That's the bit I don't get.
The reason I say that, James, is I think they believe that they can garner enough support in Britain, and I'd narrow it down to maybe England, and that's being a bit controversial, but garner enough support to get them back onto some sort of track as a not a credible party, but a big enough party. I think they're fearing losing everything, even becoming the opposition, losing that. And the Conservative machine, I think you've mentioned yourself,
it's reeling.
The backing they have. Yeah, but the backing they have through Tufton Street and others, is sort of, the Conservative Party is the vehicle for all of that movement, and they're fearing of losing it to someone else, to another interested party. And I think that's what they're trying to do. I just know by speaking to people around me, shall we say, and I don't want to mention, but speaking around me, and you can almost hear a tentative, well, some of the things they're saying is not really untrue, is it? It does worry me. It worries me.
There is something, I don't want to say Trumpian, but I think he's ushered it in. So what Starmer and Phillips are being accused of by Musk, and by, for me, more importantly, by domestic politicians and members of the media, they're being accused of being the polar opposite of what they actually are. So Jess Phillips is a tireless defender of women and girls in the face of male violence, in the face of misogynistic violence. Keir Starmer, I don't know, I'm open to correction on this, but has done more than any other lawyer in the country to pursue these. How do you defend yourself again if you're up and you're being accused of being down? How do you defend yourself? It'd be like someone accusing me of being a member of the far right. How do I prove that I'm not? Because if you're buying into that idea now, you're lost to me.
Yeah, exactly, James, and that's my worry. I mean, and I heard it. I listened to the Newsnight interview last night, and I think it was mentioned on that. And it's almost Orwellian.
Yes.
This, truth is now, lies are now truth.
Yes.
All of this.
Freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, war is peace, or whatever it was. I forget the line. And that's why the programme began this morning with a quick critique of the right-wing media, doing two things, really. Number one, not defending Britain against an attack from a far-right foreign conspiracy theorist. Number two, pretending not to understand what Keir Starmer said yesterday. For my money, that's the most dangerous bit of all. The Telegraph says calls for grooming probe are far-right. Starmer did not say that. He simply pointed out that if you're going to use language like genocide, rape, apologist, then you are engaging in far-right rhetoric, most notably and obviously the so-called Great Replacement theory, which makes no sense whatsoever the more you think about it, but which butters quite a lot of parsnips in the bile ducts of the feeble-minded. Thank you, Peter. It's 11:46. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you're wondering why, an awful lot of the stuff that I'm sharing with you today, albeit that it's all in the public domain, is reaching your ears for the very first time, then I'd politely remind you it's not me you should be asking why.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:49, and I'll say it again. It is either epic ignorance or a deliberate act of dishonesty to pretend that Keir Starmer yesterday conflated calls for another inquiry with being far right. He was referring clearly and incontrovertibly to Elon Musk's demonstrably far right interventions, most notably the deployment of the phrase genocide. In the description of Jess Phillips. I don't even fully understand it, except insofar as it's clearly a nod towards the Great Replacement theory conspiracy. You may not understand that if you're not paying attention. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I almost envy the people who are able not to pay attention to events like the ones unfolding before us. And we focus at the moment on the Conservative Party's response, trying to make sense of it, running the risk, I would say, and here are words I never thought I'd say, running the risk of making Nigel Farage look more respectable than the Tory party at the moment, which is not a position I thought anybody could ever find themselves in. But here we are. 10 to 12 is the time. Karen is in Kingston upon Thames. Karen, what would you like to say?
Hi, just
Hello.
briefly. Hi, I was a CPS prosecutor, and I understand that these things can be complicated if you don't work in the system. So briefly, all I want to say is that it is undoubtedly true that Keir Starmer and his team were amazing in dealing with this. And I think what it represents, the fact that our news media today is dealing with what is basically an attack without any substance. Yeah. It's about the decline of truth and morality in politics today. And the whole, leading on from that, any politician who's intelligent enough to write their name, who doesn't stand against these lies and the direction of travel in public life, to me is complicit in the complete degradation of public and political life. And I do note that the irony that they are claiming to protect young women while at the same time unleashing the dogs of war against Jess Phillips, another woman in public life, a very brave woman, does not escape me. So I would reserve my ire. I can't listen to Chris Phillips and Robert Jenrick, and like a lot of people, I'd have to turn the radio off often. But every Conservative MP, every MP in whatever party, particularly the women who do not stand up and say, this is not how we want to conduct our political debate. This is the dark forces behind the scenes trying to divert us. We've had 14 years of degradation of truth and morality in politics. And just when we thought we could draw a breath, this all starts. And I find it unbelievable that our politicians are not standing up en masse to say, we will not let this nonsense dictate our political
Well, they're doing the opposite. Suella Braverman has posted a message, again, endorsing the obvious lie that the Prime Minister has equated anybody calling for an inquiry with the far right, but also conveniently overlooking completely the fact that she'd have been Home Secretary, wouldn't she, when the J report landed in 2022? And Alexis J is complaining repeatedly that none of the recommendations in it have been implemented. But here's the then Home Secretary popping up to try to make it about Keir Starmer.
And this is what I mean about the standard of debate in public life today and how hugely depressing it is for ordinary members of the public who just look to our politicians to conduct an honest debate about things that matter.
Here's something that's interesting to me, and it doesn't necessarily butter all of our parsnips, because, of course, the United States of America recently re-elected Donald Trump. But the headline of the New York Times article on this issue. Elon Musk's dishonest demagoguery on grooming gangs. I've seen nothing in the UK media, certainly not in the the bigger selling corners of the UK media, coming even close to that. The billionaire is exploiting old atrocities to undermine his enemies. So the New York Times, as with Brexit, is providing a more accurate account of what's happening in the United Kingdom than 80% of the British media.
Yes, I totally. And all I can hope is that this shines a light for people like me who can't stand to listen to another word on a daily basis, but realise that our mainstream media, all the papers, etc., are owned by very questionable dark forces. I mean, the Standard bit, the Dust, having been owned by a Russian millionaire, and now we've got the same happening
that's
with
a bit
all
unfair.
the other papers.
He's also the son of a KGB spy. Let's make sure we get his full CV out in front of the people. And the person that Boris Johnson, of course, was partying with on his way back from the NATO meeting that would have included conversations about the attempts to poison the Skripals and the murder of Dawn Sturgis in Salisbury. But hey-ho.
The only light for me is that people of my age and older, as we all die off, because I'm in my 60s, will not be buying news. The younger generation don't buy this claptrap, but then they get their information from Twitter side.
From Musk. I know. Every silver lining is potentially just the introduction of another cloud. Thank you, Karen. That's 2 CPS employees, former CPS employees that have been on the show today, Karen. I don't know if you heard Richard just down the road from you
I listened to
Brentford.
him, yes.
Would I struggle to find former CPS staff who worked under Keir Starmer? Remember, Richard didn't like him, but obviously admired and respected him enormously professionally. Would I struggle to find somebody to explain what Keir Starmer did wrong in this field when he was DPP?
I think you'd find any lawyer who was around at that time. I had nothing to do with any of this, but I knew Naz, who was the prosecutor up in northwest London, by reputation, working in central London. These are amazing people, and we all know that. Well, anybody who actually bothers to have a bit of regard to the truth, and the fact that the whole of our political life this week is been discussing what is such a blatant lie. I mean, we're in a dystopian era, aren't we? Really?
Yes, we are, actually. And do you do what I do? This is how I opened the show this morning. I tried too hard to convince myself that we're not.
No, we are.
That's why I cling to ludicrous.
I
cling as I bob about in the ocean of dystopia. That's how I end up clinging to ludicrous logs like James Cleverly. I keep thinking, well, a decent Tory will emerge to point out how awful this all is, but they're not going to, are they?
No, and this is what I can't forgive them for in an era when we're losing politicians literally to far-right murderers, that they are doing nothing to protect their own and the country's politically elected representatives.
And, of course, it was reported yesterday that a man has been arrested after making threats, including to Jess Phillips. Thank you, Karen. I said it before, I'll say it again because I'm a bit self-aggrandising that way, but these are the calls that single us out on this programme. The calls from 2 former members of the CPS today that just pushes into a space that I couldn't get to without you. I just want to say that. I could sit here and talk uninterrupted for 3 hours, but the people who've walked the walk and talked the talk are the ones that often have the most to bring to the table. How do you feel if you see yourself as Tory? What's happened? The radicalisation of prominent members of the Conservative Party. I don't mean the obviously hat-stand ones like Jenrick or Braverman or Truss, but the ones that would have been, the ones that would never have countenanced this 10 years ago. Where's Tom Tugendhat? Where's Jeremy Hunt? Where are they? It's bizarre, right? That's why Karen uses the word dystopia, which I still feel myself resisting because to accept it is so bleak. Ian's in Lancaster with what will probably be the last word on this, although you never know. Ian, what would you like to say?
Well, what I want to say is that much was what has been said before. It's a lack of collegiality between different political parties. I mean, I was in politics. I'm a Labour supporter. When I was falsely accused of something, the Conservative and Liberal Democrats knew it was false. They didn't jump in on me. This was in local politics about 20 years ago. Yeah. They didn't jump in and join in. Now, that has been totally lost in recent years. I think I blame Boris Johnson the most, but currently I think Liz Truss Kemi Badenoch has to show leadership. If Kemi Badenoch had shown leadership on this issue, then the others would have fallen in behind her. The fact that she does not leads to the fact that James Cleverly and all the others don't feel that they can call out the absolute nonsense that Elon Musk...
Quite a lot of them are lawyers, though. And you heard what Karen said. It would be particularly difficult for any lawyer to buy into the nonsense that is being spewed by Elon Musk and others. But I guess it just means that they try harder they lie harder, they lie better, or they've... I don't know what it is. There's a bit of the chain missing. Because if it's self-interest... I think
there's a bit of the sort of taxi rank theory of representing clients, that, in other words, if that's what Kemi Badenoch wants, they use their lawyerly skills to support her, or at least not to attack her and not to contradict her. Yeah, I
guess the only people historically who are capable of holding politicians to account in this kind of space are journalists. It would be the fourth estate that stepped up to the plate, but the members of the media, sadly, are leading the line on the ludicrous lie that Keir Starmer's condemnation of far-right conspiracy theorists somehow equates with him calling anyone asking for another inquiry far right, which Suella Braverman has joined in with today, alongside many, 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 many others. And I don't know. Do they realise they're lying? Or do they think, well, I've got to... I mean, I've said it to you a million times. If I'd sold you Brexit, austerity, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, if I'd told you all of those people were on the right side of history, what the hell would I be doing for a living now? I'd probably be inviting Nigel Farage on the programme every month. And what do you do if you've backed all of those measurable disasters and yet you still claim some kind of validity?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 12. I could spend an hour now. I'm not going to, I promise you. We're moving on to something completely different. I could spend an hour just reflecting on why not why people like Jenrick and Braverman are doing what they're doing, because that's just, par for the course, but why people like Theresa May are silent, David Cameron silent, as a foreign plutocrat launches vicious, unevidenced attacks upon British Parliament, really, not just British politicians. I honestly don't know. It's extraordinary. And don't forget, these are the people that are supposedly deeply concerned about sovereignty, even though they struggle to tell you what it actually is. I turn our attention next to a story that... you know what I mean when I say that something is not funny, but it is. It doesn't make me a bad person. I'm talking about a situation that from the outside may appear somewhat comical, or at least, but there's obviously nothing funny about it if you're in it, until perhaps you reach a point where happily you can see that there is. I wonder if you've got the first idea what story it is I'm about to refer to from the last 24 hours of news. It was mentioned yesterday that it was Divorce Day. I don't know if you know that. It was also the day, I lost that as well. It was also the day on which the average earnings of a FTSE 100 chief executive overtook the national average. So that it was about lunchtime yesterday. In other words, January the 6th, the 6th day of January, my true love sent to me, the average FTSE 100 income overtook the national annual average. We should have done a little more on that, but I was getting distracted. But it was also National Divorce Day. And to mark Divorce Day, they always produce some stories that are very much of the zeitgeist, very much of the moment. And the zeitgeist at the moment, the number of people getting divorced has plummeted, which is not necessarily good news for those of us who champion the supremacy of married life. I'm joking. I don't anymore. I used to be an idiot about marriage, and I've worked out why, and I've explained why, and I won't bore you with the details again. But the findings that have been released this week show that more and more people have to stay in marriages because they actually can't afford to get divorced. And it's not just about the cost of paying lawyers. It could be something as simple as not having enough income between you to sustain two properties, to sustain two homes in the event of you actually splitting up. There are more details in this story, but the number, 17% of all divorces deferred in the last 5 years were deferred because of money worries, living expenses, the cost of the divorce itself, the value of the family home. And I just want to know what that's like. I just want to know, and that's why I said it's funny and it's not funny at the same time, because those of us who are happily married, touch wood, those of us who are happily married can occasionally, Mrs. O'Brien tells me, although it never moves in the opposite direction, we can occasionally get on each other's nerves. I have no reason to doubt her when she tells me this, although I can't think of any evidence or grounds for this claim at all. But apparently it is possible for happily married people to get on each other's nerves. So I'm going to think of something that you do that really annoys me. If we're married and you do something that really annoys me, I'm not going to come up with much. Maybe I've lost something. And you get annoyed that I keep losing things, that I can't find things. And when I say, I can't find my keys, and you say, have you looked in the key drawer? And I go, oh, no, I didn't think of looking in the bloody key drawer for my keys that I can't find it. Oh, no, absolutely. So that kind of little niggle is not going to be grounds for divorce. But if it was happening 10 times a day, the level of irritation would become quite high. What else do you get irritated? The dishwasher, perhaps. The way that some people seem to be physically incapable of properly loading a dishwasher. I have no idea which way round plates should go or whether or not you should rinse things or what goes where. Just they stick it in. A bit like playing Jenga with your eyes shut. That's how some people seem to approach dishwasher loading. I'm not mentioning any names whatsoever. But minor irritations that you can laugh off or shrug off, even though they can't. I just can't imagine what it would be like if you had to carry on living with someone that you'd already decided to split up with. And what if you were the other party? Oh, my heart is breaking. What if you're the person that has been left and you can't afford to go your separate ways? So either you're either deferring divorce, or you're living under the same roof after divorce. What's it like? 0345 60 60973. I mean, listen, I know I sound a little smug. I don't mean to. I'm conscious when I sound smug. Often I do mean to, but I don't on this. I thank my lucky stars every day that I have an incredible marriage. I think probably the single most amazing thing that's ever happened to me, because without the marriage there wouldn't be the children. So marriage for me, my marriage specifically, or my relationship with Mrs. O'Brien, whether we were married or not, is a genuine source of never-ending joy to me. So I'm not being smug. I'm being grateful, but it means I'm very underqualified to imagine what would happen if you had to live under the same roof as somebody that you had decided to break up with, or that you had effectively broken up with, whether you've actually got divorced or not. So it's a bit like the conversations we've had about children moving back in again with parents after parents thought they'd seen the back of them for forever. But cost of living, financial crisis, property prices, all of these things conspire to create a scenario in which you have domestic situations you never thought you would find yourself living in. And although they are, quotes, normal, end quotes, to you, they are completely abnormal to the point of being incomprehensible to the rest of us. So there might be some positive stories. I mean, the best story in a way, it wouldn't be great radio. Great radio would be funny and shocking. But the best stories in a way would involve a reunion. You got divorced or you split up, but you had to live under the same roof and you fell back in love again over the dishwasher perhaps, or the key drawer. I want to know what it's like. 0345 60 60973 to have to live with someone that you've split up with. And of course, it doesn't have to be divorce or marriage that are involved in this scenario. It's just that you circumstances dictate, circumstances demand that you continue cohabiting even though the relationship is over. I just want to know what that is like. So forget divorce and marriage, like specifically, although obviously they are the strongest elements of this conversation, and focus instead on relationships coming to an end, but couples being unable to go their separate ways. Because I don't know whether it's a bit silly of me to focus on minor irritations, to focus on the things that can get on your nerves in a happy marriage, or at least in a solid marriage, in a marriage that is surviving, in a marriage that is going fine, and you can still have quite big rows, or you can still have moments of disagreement. But if you are no longer together, what do you do? Do you completely ignore each other? We looked at a house once that had been split into two. We looked at it with a view to buying it. It was a beautiful house, and we couldn't quite work out what was wrong with it. We couldn't quite put our finger on what was going on in the house because of the way that it was arranged. And it had two kitchens. And then we kind of realised, I spoke to the estate agent about it, and they had been living in it for about 20 years after getting divorced. They'd sort of split that. It was obviously quite a big house. They'd sort of split it down the middle. And they seemed to muddle along, but they had next to nothing to do with each other, except the garden. They both liked gardening. So apart from the garden, where they would collaborate and converse, they barely went near each other, and yet they lived in the same building. I just want to know what that is like. 0345 6060 973. Phil says, imagine your ex-wife cannot afford to leave and has a new partner who gets on really well with your children. I sense you're not imagining that, Phil. I sense you're describing your own reality. I mean, what is that like? There's so much going on at the moment that falls under the, what's the word I'm looking for? Just the new normal, things that never would have happened in the past, but which are becoming increasingly normal now. You think of children moving back in with mum and dad because of their respective financial situations. You kind of think of people who want to split up but can't split up. It's not a key draw, it's a key bowl, but I thought key bowl would sound weird. All right, I don't know why I said key draw. Stop picking me up on minor domestic details about my blissful harmony. I'm interested in your misery. I'm interested in the horrors, or perhaps the unexpected positives of having to continue cohabiting even though you've split up, all right? Because that is the big story of Divorce Day, the number of couples who are either staying together after divorce or deferring the divorce itself. So you've split up, you just haven't formalised. What about dating? What do you do on that? Do you vacate the house? Why someone? Oh, I dread to think. Where'd you get the energy? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Serious or silly, funny or anything but. All human life hopefully will be here, but as ever, it's entirely up to you.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 minutes after 12 is the time. Whatever the reason, and it will usually be financial, but there may be others. You may have done it for the kids, actually. You thought, well, look, neither of us are particularly keen to start new, meaningful relationships. The kids love us being together. We may as well carry on living in the same house, albeit that we are no longer a couple. We are no longer partners. Some self-appointed comedians in the house today. Where's that? I quite liked that one. Here it is. I can't find it now. From Michael. My friend and his ex-wife split their house equally, James. She got the inside, he got the outside. A lot of you reminded me of that episode of Steptoe and Son where they split the house down the middle. And if memory serves, that included the television. So father and son could only see half the TV each. So look, the comic potential of this is clear. It makes me wonder why, as a couple of you have pointed out, including John Davids, it's the plot for a modern sitcom. Why hasn't it happened? It wouldn't have happened in the past because it wouldn't have been a thing. If you wanted to split up, you could split up. You could go your separate ways. Now you can't. Property's so expensive. It's much, much harder. Has anyone done a sitcom where a couple have had to carry on living together despite the fact that they had officially split up? Yes, there you go. I've got so many ideas popping up on this programme. And obviously there's going to be some serious answers to this question as well. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Jamie, for example, tells me, my mum and dad stayed in the same house for 5 years as they needed to sell it. They had separate everything and never spoke at all. That's the thing I'm interested in. I wonder whether it will have to be children that tell us or something, or friends. But actually managing to sustain two entirely separate ecosystems under the same roof. Steve is on. I don't think I've ever had a call from the Bridge of Erne before, Steve.
Hi, James.
What would you like to say?
Well, I find myself in exactly the situation you're describing.
Oh, so I'm sorry.
I felt compelled to ring in.
So tell me more. What's happened?
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well, you've picked your moment, Steve. Certainly.
Indeed. So, yeah, she announced a couple of years ago, coming up Easter, that she didn't want to be with me anymore.
Oh.
Didn't really get much of an opportunity to explore how we could work through the challenges.
Yeah.
So kind of she decided, fait accompli and all that. So yeah, we've got two young children. So one is coming up 10, the other is 12. He's just started high school, so there's a lot going on in their lives at the moment. And we kind of worked out fairly quickly that we both worked hard, had good jobs. If we were to go our separate ways, then challenges with childcare. You can tell I'm not Scottish, by the way. So all of my family is down south or living abroad. So it's a case of we've got to try and find
so you
a way.
You couldn't afford to keep two separate properties, effectively.
We probably could, but it would mean selling the family house, buying two separate houses. Could mean then separate schools and total life changes for the kids.
Did you both want the same thing? I mean, was it a compromise you arrived at together, or was one of you the driving force behind the idea of staying in the family home? Because I'd have thought if your wife had asked to separate, she would have been keen to make the separation physical.
I think she probably was, and I think then reality hit home afterwards about how were we going to manage the kids, their lives.
Yeah.
Everything else.
And how's it working out? What changes have you made then?
Well, so we converted the garage. That's been made into a separate bedroom.
And that's yours?
No.
Okay.
She made the split. So
okay.
She's got the smaller room. She uses the back of the house. We're lucky to have like a sunroom as a separate lounge.
Okay.
So she has her own lounge, and we've recently converted the downstairs bathroom to put a shower in there as well. So kind of separate living within the same house.
Yeah. I mean, you understand. I imagine if you'd been listening to this programme 5 years ago and you heard you'd be thinking what I'm thinking now, which is how on earth do you do
Crazy.
it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I can't. It's not easy.
No, and you're not happy. I mean, you're still quite upset about the split anyway. So
yeah.
So the next question then becomes: do you still get on okay? Do you have civilized conversations? Do you watch telly together in the evenings?
No. We don't watch TV. We don't do anything together.
So I mean, what do you say when you pass each other?
She doesn't say a lot.
Do you have your own kitchen, or do you have you make breakfast in the same room?
That's probably the most challenging thing.
Breakfast
kitchen,
or food, the kitchen.
Well, food, kitchen, cooking, making sure you're not treading on each other's toes.
You never eat together. You never eat the same meal.
I went round her parents for Christmas. I get on well with her family still. So.
And how do the kids make sense of it? Do you think? I mean, hand on heart. Is this better or worse for the kids than if you could have afforded to buy next door, for example, or a mile down the road?
I have to think the fact that we are both doing what we need to do for them under the same roof is better for them at this stage in their life.
Okay. And what about...
maybe if I could buy the house next door, it would be a bit easier.
Yeah, it'd be a different proposition, because it would be the same thing, just logistically much, much easier, wouldn't it?
Indeed.
Do you buy separate food? I'm so curious. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Tell me to sod off if I'm getting on your nerves. You do separate food shop. Who buys the kids' food?
I tend to do most of the kids' cooking or the grandparents.
Yeah.
And... she quite often is the buyer of takeaways and stuff at weekends for the kids.
Oh, okay. But you'd never sit down and all eat as a foursome?
No.
Oh,
No.
That's a bit sad. And that's never going to happen, you don't think?
I don't think so, no.
What about, and forgive me again if I pry unduly, but you rang in. I didn't ring you.
Indeed. I felt compelled.
I know, and I'm glad you did, because this is, I mean, if it'd be Ray Liotta territory if it was a slightly different subject matter. What about dating and starting new relationships?
A bit of a challenge, bit of a red flag when you... oh, by the way, I'm still...
So it's worse than a flatmate, though, because it's...
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And I couldn't possibly bring someone back to the house. It'd just be a total nightmare. So
that's all on hold?
Treading carefully, let's say.
I understand. So you can go on a date, or you could perhaps, if you got lucky, go back to someone else's, but there's no earthly way you could ever introduce a new partner into the curious domestic arrangements that you enjoy. Is there anything remotely positive about it, apart from the fact that you see your children every day?
No, that's the main driver, really, is putting their happiness ahead of mine, if I'm brutally honest.
Well, I suppose in a way we all do that, but it's about gradations, isn't it? It's about levels. And I don't know that there'd be an answer to my next question. What's the worst thing about it? I mean, the single worst thing, the thing that...
It's just that whole treading on eggshells. You know, I know exactly the person you're talking about, dishwasher stacking, and it really gets to me. But you just have to bite your tongue in the morning and, you know...
You do now. Well, you didn't have to in the past, because it could have been something, you know, you point out little foibles in the hope that you'll both make efforts to improve. But if you've gone your separate ways, that ship has sailed, hasn't it?
Indeed.
What does the light at the end of the tunnel look like? Final question, I promise.
I honestly don't know. Happy kids is the main thing.
And is that happening? Is that you would say they are good?
We've been through a couple of bumps with them where they got upset about stuff.
Yeah,
of course. Why isn't Dad coming on holiday and that sort of stuff. But we just do our separate things with them. So.
Well, good luck to you, mate. Seriously, good luck to both of you. I mean, I know to all of you, because it's, as you say, it is, you know, a situation that has been thrust upon you, and not one that anyone would sort of choose cold as the best case scenario, but making the best of a bad lot is, I guess, what's going to underpin all of these examples. Thank you, Steve. Ooh, I'm going to give you a Ray Liotta anyway. I might put a smile on you. Do you want a Ray Liotta? I mean, you rang in straight up and you've described exactly what's on the page.
I'm Ray Liotta, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
Much appreciated.
They will come.
You too, mate. Stay safe. 26 minutes after 12 is the time. I tell you what I say, and I hope Steve doesn't mind me saying this. I feel tired thinking about that, because it's. I try to think what the equivalent would be. At boarding school, you never got headspace. Do you know what I mean? You never got away from it all. And I know, even if you're happily married, you might struggle to find headspace. But if you're actively triggered by the presence of the person that you're living with, like he talked about walking on eggshells. There you go. That's the phrase we need. That's the only phrase we need. Walking on eggshells is exhausting, because you've got to tiptoe everywhere. I mean, it's absolutely exhausting, isn't it? Because you're constantly thinking about things you would never have to think about if you were walking on a normal floor, but you're not. You're walking on eggshells. Holy moly. Jim's in Merthyr Tydfil. Jim, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. First time caller, long time listener.
Welcome. I'm sorry it's on such a tricky topic.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you my story.
Yeah.
So in about September time, my wife of 15 years,
yes.
Decided that she didn't want to do it anymore. So we recently moved to the area, managed to buy our first house.
Right.
We've got a lovely dog, 3 daughters. It's awesome. And it just, so she said she wanted to separate,
right.
I guess temporarily until she worked out what she wanted.
Yes.
But because she's had a few wobbles in the past, I decided that I couldn't put myself through it. So I said, no, I can't do this anymore. I suggested that we have counselling to try and sort things out, even if it was just to make the split amicable. But she wasn't interested. But because she's recently started her own business, she cannot afford the mortgage that we've got, and she can't pass the credit checks in order to rent anywhere. So she's stuck in the house. So we've decided to share the bedroom. So she'll have it for 1 week, and I'll sleep downstairs, and we'll swap.
Mate.
And and
so you can't move out because she couldn't afford to keep the house. You can't afford to pay for two properties effectively, which is the only way that this would work.
Yeah, no, I can't do that. I mean, I could try and live with my mum or something, but that'd be ridiculous. And I'm an old geezer now, James. I'm 47.
Aren't we all?
Yeah.
Well, at least you can still go up the stairs once a week.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
every other week.
Yeah.
And is it? I mean, we can laugh, and it's important to smile and see the funny side. But this is just exhausting.
Yeah, very tiring. They all went to her family in England over Christmas, and for 3 days I couldn't sleep.
Because you were on your own.
Yeah, because the house was different.
I can't do that.
The whole
either.
energy of the house was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I've had sort of mental health issues in the past, so I can see. I can see the cloud coming. So I'm getting help from the NHS and some other help.
Good.
But yeah,
I know what you're saying, because it's a cloud that follows you around a bit. Are there any upsides? Do you still get on? Do you talk much?
Yeah, we do. But she has conversations with me that we would have previously.
Yeah.
And I can't let myself care. I can't let myself get
emotionally involved, because she's told you that she doesn't want to be emotionally involved with you anymore.
That's right. Yeah.
That's so tricky.
It is a bit. And you know, I've pointed out there are two things that are really going to get messy, and that's money and the kids.
Yeah.
And she seems to think it would be fine, but I'm just a bit more wary about things.
What will be fine if you were to have two separate homes?
Yeah. So it would be like the kids would stay in my house for most of the week, and then maybe she'd have them on weekends. And I don't see how it's necessarily that's all nice and good in theory, but
in practice,
practicality,
I mean, it happens more and more, but the kind of shared parenting. But I like, as you say, it's certainly not easy. And final question: how are the kids dealing with it? How have the kids made sense of it?
Well, they're fine. We sat down with them and we explained it.
Probably more. I don't know, mate. What do you think? More traumatic to go to bed every night in a house where one of you wasn't, or Go on.
My family exploded in quite a nasty way when I was young, but that necessitated my father to stay at Her Majesty's pleasure, shall we say?
Yeah. Okay.
And but we've sat down and we've explained it that things just aren't the same anymore, and tra-la-la. But it's like a knife to my heart. Every now and again, my youngest will say, "Oh, because you and Mummy don't love each other anymore," blah blah blah. And I'm like, that kills me.
Of course, it kills you. But on the other hand, it shows that you've got it right, Jim, doesn't it? It shows that you've managed somehow to negotiate this emotional minefield in a way that the youngest has actually processed and is comfortable with. That is an extraordinary achievement, mate. That for them it's normal. I can see why it breaks your heart every time you hear it, but it means it's not broken theirs.
Yeah, well, the conclusion, the aim, the ideal is that everyone comes away happy, and it's going to be difficult.
It is.
I think, like you were talking about eggshells earlier.
Yes.
Maybe I was treading on eggshells during the marriage.
Okay.
And this has sort of freed me up a bit.
I understand. So you're getting closer to your authentic self.
Yeah. So if I can find my happiness, and if my wife can find her happiness, then hopefully that will bleed into the kids.
Yeah.
And, we'll all be good. But, I mean, I'm just worried about things like the house and
of course
the dog
you are.
and the... Yeah.
Of course you are. You deserve happiness. I wonder if you believe that.
No, I don't.
No, I didn't think you did. But I promise you do.
Thank you.
Don't thank me. You do. Thank the universe. You deserve happiness. And I hope you find it.
Yes. Yeah, I'm doing all I can.
Yeah, I can tell. Hey, hang in there, mate, because you deserve it, and you've got this.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Okay, well, have a good day.
You too. Stay safe. It's 12:34. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:38 is the time. A lot of you are very moved by the calls that we've taken already. I'm struck by one thing, which is that I don't have any women waiting to talk to me, which I don't know whether that is pertinent or not, but a few of you have picked up on that as a positive. For example, Gethin, who writes, "Thank you for this. You're giving heartbroken men an outlet to talk about their struggles, which is not done enough." Poby says, "I'm struck by how open these men are to talk about this topic. We're told that as men we need to open up more and communicate. It's a breath of fresh air," says Paul in Liverpool, "to hear it happening with such an uncomfortable topic." And a lot of love coming in for the chaps that we've heard from. One negative, I'll read it out just because it might make you giggle. It did me. "You sad, patronising man, I hope you get divorced and someone talks to you in such a manner. Then you will feel small, you sad man." I can't imagine for a minute why she left you, mate. Seriously, it's an absolute mystery to me. 12:39 is the time. And Andy's Man Club, a few of you have reminded me, is a wonderful organisation that provides a space in which more and more men can have the kind of conversations that we are often conditioned not to have, albeit that I don't think anyone disputes anymore how helpful they can be. And I've got one more self-appointed comedian. We haven't got a badum-tish, have we, Keith? I don't think we should get one. It's a bit obvious, isn't it? Badum-tish. Anyway, I can do it myself. This is from Alan. "Hold on to your hats. My wife and I have had to stay married because we couldn't agree the split. Both of us wanted the dog, but nobody wanted the kids. Badum-tish." Or not. 12:40 is the time. Leslie's in Rotherham. Leslie, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, long-time admirer, first-time caller again.
Thank you, Leslie.
I'm an parent, actually, speaking on behalf of my son, who lives about 200 miles away from where I am. He's down Bristol.
Right.
But his wife's been having an affair. They're not married.
Right.
They've been living together. They've got a 4-year-old child together. She's got a 14-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
Right.
12 months ago, she started having an affair with somebody else, but the relationship had to end. But the thing is, they've been in this house for about 5 years. Now, the thing is, the equity on the property was £150,000. She told him that she wouldn't agree to sell the house unless he gave her £90,000 of that £150,000.
Right.
Now, after we approached him, he approached the solicitor and found out that he couldn't force the sale because she refused to sell the property. But that means she could have gone to a family court, and to be honest with you, he's in a terrible, his mental health and physical health suffered because of all this. He had a potential heart attack back in August. He has got an heart condition. It wasn't a heart attack as it was, but his partner actually, when he came out of hospital, she actually bragged to him that she'd made love in their marital bed. So all this has taken a terrible toll of him, and he can't afford to move out, but me and my wife are actually going to use some of his own fine. He's going to decide to just give in to it all.
Well, and take the 60.
Let her have what she wants.
Right.
Just take that money, and we're going to help him just get out of there and get a deposit for another property, because you see,
never stop being a dad, do you, Leslie? Hey?
No, you don't. I mean, the thing is, he works in London. He does 3 days in London and 2 days at home.
Right.
He's like a chief pharmacist. He's got a really good job, and because of that, she's making that demand on him. Now, the thing is...
and she's got him over a barrel. I mean, I don't know whether she'd put forward a slightly different version of events, but she's left him. She started a new relationship. She's bullying him in the house, and she's blackmailing him into giving up more of his I mean, what is it? It's only 15 grand, I suppose. I mean, I say only very loosely, but she wants 15 grand of his money, as it were.
Well, there's 140,000, and she wants 90,000 of that 140,000, which leaves it. She gets 90 and he gets 50.
So it's 20. So it should be 70. So she's getting 20 of his, but he ends up of course, 20 down. And at some point, you have to reject natural justice, don't you? You have to reject fairness and prioritise your boy's health and think, I don't...
Yeah, because we're worried about his job as well. He works in London, and his boss has been very understanding during all this time, but he's just treading water, and if he just carries on like this, it's going to... God knows what will happen to his physical and mental health, and he could even lose his job. So really, me and my ex-wife have got together, and we're going to help him get a deposit together so he can get out of it.
Well, at least it'll be equity, at least it's, because it'll be your retirement money or something like that,
The thing is, if there had been no equity, then they'd have been trapped there, really.
Forever.
I mean, she's living on the top floor. They're in a 3-story house. She's living on the top floor, and he's living on the second floor. So it's been a horrendous...
What happened at Christmas? Did you see him at Christmas?
Well, me and my ex-wife went to spend Christmas with him. She went off with this guy. Her 2 children, she left them with her ex-husband, and she was on her own with this guy. And
I know she's the mother of your grandchild, but he does sound on one level that he might be better off out of it.
Yeah, definitely. So I could go on forever, but I'll not go on and on.
You don't have to. No, there's a million different pictures, Leslie, and you've painted a very poignant one. I hope you'd allow me to say that, and I know you could never have contemplated of acting any differently, but that's some top dadding there, and some top mumming, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's inspiring to hear that, because, I don't know what you were like when he reached his majority. But some of us sort of somewhat taken by surprise when you realise, no, going away to university doesn't actually dilute or diminish any of your responsibilities, any of your worries, any of your cares or any of your concerns. I phoned my dad on my wedding day, the day before my wedding day, when I did all the sums, and I'd missed £1,000 off all of the bills that I was going to have to pay the next day. Well, who else can I call? I can only call my dad. It's as nothing compared to the situation you and yours find yourself in, but it's a timely reminder that you're never really off duty if you're lucky enough to have a dad like Leslie, or indeed like mine.
James O'Brien on LBC.
47 is the time. It's true that as men we're told to be open about our emotions, says Sean, but very often when we are, it's perceived as weak. I really do applaud the bravery and honesty of the men who have called you today. And it is not by design, entirely by accident. Exclusively men so far, although this is from a woman who's asked me not to mention her name. I went through this for years and years after having a child, and we couldn't afford to separate. The same house, even the same bed, because there was no spare room in the house. I couldn't even stand to look at him, and he couldn't stand to look at me. It was a miserable decade. I thought I'd never free myself of the situation or ever like him again. When COVID hit, I thought, how can I spend 24 hours a day in the same house? But something happened, and we're now totally resolved. Post-COVID, we're better than we've ever been. If we'd gone our separate ways, we never would have got back together, as we literally couldn't stand each other. Things are so good now that I'm actually looking forward to the future. I mean, we're a weird old bunch, aren't we? Human beings. There's more there, but I've pressed the wrong button on the screen, so I can't read the rest of it. Darren is in Croydon. Darren, what made you pick up the phone?
You know what? A long-time listener. Love your show, James.
Thank you.
But I relate to everything you're saying, especially the dishwasher stuff.
I don't know if I should have used that, because I mean, some of the stories we've heard are so serious. I hope that no one would ever effect a proper split or a fracture in a relationship over something that well, I guess everything mounts up, doesn't it? It's the thing.
I mean, what I found amongst the relationship, I mean, in lockdown, we were on essential conversation only. I only spoke to her about what we needed to talk about, and that was our son, and that was it. And I'm in a position where I haven't got enough money to move out, but I'm prepared to walk away with nothing, leave her everything, and start afresh, purely because I believe in myself and achieving things.
Good. But you can't, I mean, can she afford to keep the home that she's in now with your son if you're not there?
Yes, 100%. There's more than one property between us.
Oh, okay. So how come you haven't made the split already, if you don't mind me asking?
Because the properties are all in her name, and I don't have the funds. I mean, I've contributed towards the marital home, but I'm prepared to walk away with nothing and start again.
What's it like to do that thing where you have essential? I mean, because I got some of the messages earlier with the first caller when I used the word exhausted. It's like hypervigilance, isn't it? You're constantly, Marita puts it well, house sharing with somebody you can't stand, you literally plan your day around avoiding the person. You have no idea how draining it can be.
Yeah, you just avoid each other and just have essential conversation. We don't sleep in the same room anymore. We've not slept in the same room for about 8 years. So yeah, it's I mean, look, the way I see it, if you can't be yourself in your relationship, that's all that counts, you know.
Yeah.
You only want to be yourself, right? If you can't, there's no effort into being you if you can't be accepted as you.
It was interesting what Steve said, actually, first, about he felt he was doing more treading on eggshells when he was in the relationship than he was afterwards. And what about for your child? How does it play for them, do you think?
You know what, for him, his best mate at school has gone through this breakup.
Right.
And he understands that process. And myself and my partner have got different parenting styles.
Okay.
So I feel extremely challenged majority of the time based on the things that she teaches him, and they're the opposite of what I think.
It's sounding pretty toxic, actually, isn't it?
However, your last thing that you read out was very inspirational. It gave me a little bit of hope. I mean, I actually said, look, I'm moving. I've got a different plan for this year. I want to move abroad. And that was when she turned around and she goes, I don't want to lose you.
Blimey.
And I thought, well, I've already packed. Half my bags have already gone.
And there's a lot going on. And it sounds as if it's as much, I mean, relationships are never, no two relationships are ever the same. But communication, I suppose, is always better than no communication, which is why these scenarios where you're actually cohabiting but not communicating are so hard for the rest of us to understand. But good luck, mate, seriously, and thank you for sharing. I take at least one more call. I may have to apologise to Paul and Vincent and Sally. No, we can talk to Vincent, but I do want to play that Jess Phillips clip again before I go, because I think it is such a crucial part of this ludicrous, propaganda-driven war that Elon Musk is waging upon the United Kingdom, with Jess Phillips very much at the front of the firing line. So before that, Vincent is in Clapham. Vincent, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James. Long-time listener, and so much I'd like to say, and so many different things, and I hope you let me on again. Okay, I know we've only got short time.
Yes.
We've been divorced 13 years.
13.
Yeah, I have 5 sons.
Crikey.
Unfortunately, my oldest one died over Chelsea Bridge 6 years ago, but that's another thing. Okay, right. So they've all left now.
Right.
Now, my youngest one is only just left 3 months ago. He was the last one to leave.
So you still live with their mum, 13 years divorced, living in the same house?
Yeah, we're still living in the same house in Clapham. We got divorced. The early years is when we were both, as most divorces, trying to kill each other and trying to get each other out and hurting each other.
Right.
But somehow we survived that. And to try and fast forward a bit, we still eat together. We still make each other's meals.
Yeah.
From time to time, we may watch TV together. But when all the children come home, so we say Christmas time, we all play pool together. She cooks dinner. It's like nothing's changed. And I think what's happened is, because she's an Irish Italian descent and a strong Catholic.
Yes.
I think you may ask us, how come you still together, and where does the other girls or men fit in? Well, with some people, and especially with my ex-wife, it's like she's one of those girls. It's like it's one love and one man in my life, and that's it. Yeah. All her energies is in it's to do with her sons, and that's all she really cares about, because she's a very beautiful-looking lady. You wouldn't even think she's a 62, and she just finished the marathon. But anyway, there's that.
You weren't kidding when you said you had a lot to get through. I'm going to run out of time, but you've found a happy medium then, have you? Do you think you'll stay in the house?
Well, yeah.
Even though now it's just the two of you rattling around in a great big mansion in Clapham.
Well, not mansion.
Yeah, but that's the thing about Clapham, isn't it? You're the only person who said, I've got a big house. In Clapham. Yeah, that's in Clapham. I love it. Vincent, stay safe. I did warn you that I wanted to end with this, because I think it's really, really, really important. You know, whatever your politics, there is authenticity, and then there's Robert Jenrick. There is authenticity, and then there's Liz Truss. There is honesty, and then there's Kemi Badenoch. There is decency in politics. And then there's Elon Musk. This is Jess Phillips speaking in the chamber of the House of Commons in January of last year during a debate about the Rwanda bill. And sitting directly opposite her as she spoke was James Cleverly.
I want everybody in here to know that they are about to vote for a bill that they have absolutely no idea how much it's going to cost. Like, we haven't been given that information. I was in for the committee stage of the debate. Earlier, and the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee said that there was a view that each person that was sent to Rwanda would cost £169,000. And it piqued my anger so greatly, because I had just come from an event with the Home Secretary around it being a year on from the Independent Child Sexual Abuse Inquiry, and what progress we have made since then. And I was holding in my hand a piece of paper that said that in 2022, 100,000 children were sexually abused, and came forward and said it. And then I looked up how much money the Home Office was allocating for their Sexual Abuse Against Children Fund in 2022, and it was £4.5 million, which I worked out was £42 for every child who'd been raped in that year. And I thought, what political capital of walking round and round and round and round for now the third bill for something that won't work. And 150 judges can be found yesterday under the, the sofa by the Prime Minister, when cases in my constituency of rape victims waiting 7 years to get in front of a judge. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, people who think that the amount of time spent on wasting taxpayers' money on something that hasn't worked the last 2 times we tried it and will not work this time, frankly, Mr. Speaker, should be ashamed of themselves for voting for something when they don't have any idea how much it's going to cost the people in their constituencies. I hope they feel shame for the amount of airtime and the amount who turned up today, but not for the victims of child abuse. Excuse me, would you like to intervene? No. The other thing I want to say is that I was in a British court last week, not a foreign court, a British court. I was in a British court with a victim of human trafficking. She'd been trafficked twice. We deported her once already as a trafficking victim, and she was re-trafficked back to this country. And I went to the upper tribunal with her last week. She has 2 children born of the repeated rapes that she suffered as a victim of human trafficking. And the Home Office was trying to deport her again, to which the judge scolded the Home Office lawyers for daring to bring it in front of them. And because I was sat in the courtroom, the Home Office lawyers were not so keen to give their evidence in front of me, so they didn't really give any. Yeah, I wonder why they didn't want to talk about how it was fine for a woman who'd been ritually raped repeatedly and repeatedly to have to go back to the country where that had happened and she had been trafficked to here. I have heard nothing today in any of the debates about when we scoop up all these people without any appeal, what happens to the victims of human trafficking? What happens to them? Because currently I've sat in courtrooms where this government is abusing them.
I'd just remind you that Robert Jenrick was a Home Office Minister from October of 2022 to December of 2023. But get that Jess Phillips clip. It's on my Blue Sky feed. Share it. Spread it wide. Can't do much up against someone as powerful and as rich and as big as Elon Musk, but there is truth and there is untruth. And if you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. That's it from me for today. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. But now on LBC, it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.